My name is Detective Peter Hugo, and I'll be walking through my field notes showing the sequence of events that we believe happened the afternoon that Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. Smith were murdered in their home. The afternoon of the murder, Anton Geisler and Henry Barr left the Smith home after having tea. The teacups were still on the table in the front room when we arrived at the murder scene, so we know that the murder happened not long after that. The Smiths locked the front door behind them, as they always do. Henry shares in later interviews that both Smiths were old and hard of hearing. That is important later, as it explains why they did not hear the window breaking a short while later. Henry went to his house and his fingerprint was found near the front porch right here, indicating that he continued in the direction away from the house. However, Anton doubled back after Henry was out of sight and went to the workshop. Anton's footprint was found near the workshop. Here we believe that he opened the latch to the workshop. Since the latch had his fingerprints on it, the fingerprints were clear and not smudged, indicating that Anton was the last person to open the workshop. The hammer and the axe were in the workshop, and Anton grabbed these. Hammers here, axe there, hammers here. Although Henry's fingerprints were also on the hammer, the fingerprints were higher up, indicating that Henry may have put the hammer away earlier. Anton's fingerprints were clearly on the handle lower down, like this. Nearby were the east room window and the doors to the basement. We found Anton's footprint near the east window, outlined in dirt on the light white paint of the basement door. We believe that the suspect stood on the basement door and broke the window with the hammer. Then he opened the window by reaching through the broken glass and unlocking the window. Blood type A+ was found on the windowsill of the east room window below the window opening. This indicates that the perpetrator cut his hand while lifting the sash or while climbing in the window. Only 2 suspects have type A+ blood, and one of them is Anton Geisler.
Okay.
Then the suspect walked from the window to the chest in the east room, and some blood droplets from the wound were on the floor near the chest. It was blood type A+, which was the same as Anton's. Anton proceeded to open the chest and take the money out. Witnesses said that the Smiths kept their money in the chest, but there was no money found when the police arrived. So we believe that the perpetrator took the money. There were blood droplets on the money chest, and it was A+, which could belong to Anton. There was a hair belonging to Mr. Smith on the chest, indicating that he had opened the chest recently, which is indicative that there was money in the chest. The dog woke up and chased the suspect from the east room to the front room. There was a dog hair found in the front of the money chest. The scare resulted in Anton going back through the house instead of going back out the window with the money. Upon seeing Anton entering the front room, the Smiths became aware of the intruder and screamed. This caused Anton to panic. Mr. and Mrs. Smith were sitting in their rocking chairs. Mr. Smith jumped up, and the suspect hit him with the axe, causing arterial spurts onto the wall, most likely this one. Causing this injury to the head would have been fatal. He fell on the carpet and blood from the head wound flowed out on the carpet. The suspect then used the hammer to kill Rebecca Smith. There was no evidence of arterial spray of her blood, indicating a blunt object like the hammer, and her blood was found on the hammer. Panicking, the suspect went into the parlor room where he dropped the hammer with the blood drops belonging to Mrs. Smith. The fingerprints that were found on the handle of the hammer belonged to Anton. He then went outside the house and to the side of the house with the broken window and dropped the bloody axe with his type A blood on it.
Please state your name for the record.
Henry Baller.
How well do you know the Smiths?
I've been working for them for 2 years, and I know that they were nice people.
Were they trusting people, and would they open the door to a stranger?
No, probably not. And they always kept their doors locked even when they were home.
Do you have any idea why they stayed in the front room even though a window was broken by the murderer?
They were both a little bit older and going deaf. When I had tea with them, I had to shout even though I was right next to them.
What do you think of Anton Gessler?
He worked hard on the farm, and I think he expected to get paid more than $4 for a month of work. I think he felt that the Smiths were taking advantage of him, and he was envious of their money.
Did Anton get along well with the Smiths?
Mr. Smith could be a little cruel, and he made fun of the fact that Anton could not speak English.
Did Anton ever use the tools in the shed?
Yes, that's where all the tools that were used on the farm were kept. Anton got tools out of there every day before work.
Did you ever see Anton use an axe?
Anton was very proficient and strong when using an axe. He chopped the wood for the fireplace every day.
Did Anton use the hammer for any of his chores?
Yes, he used the hammer for fixing the fence around the pens for the animals. He could swing that thing.
Since Anton lived nearby, would he know when the Smiths would be alone?
Yes, he knew when I left after tea, and he would have been able to hear if I had started to come back.
Did you ever see Anton lose his temper?
He was usually pretty chill, except he did complain a lot.
Thank you. You may be excused. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?
Yes.
Please state your name for the record.
Anton Geisler.
Where were you when the Smiths were murdered?
After I had tea with them, I left the farm.
Your pants were torn at the knee. How did that happen?
When I was working earlier in the day, my pants got caught on the fence and tore.
At the time you had tea with Henry and the Smiths, were your pants torn at that time? Remember, we can check this with Henry.
Yes, my pants were torn at the time we had tea.
Your footprints were near the east room window, which was broken. How do you explain that?
For the month that I worked for the Smiths, I have probably walked all over the property. I'm not surprised that you can find my footprints there.
Your fingerprints and hair were found on the east window where someone had opened it after breaking the pane. Can you explain that?
The window was sticking last week, and I had tried to fix it. My fingerprints and hair could have gotten on the window at that time.
Blood type A positive was found on the money chest in the east room. That is your blood type. Do you know how that could be?
When Mr. Smith was getting the $4 to pay me for the month, I may have got some blood on the chest.
Your fingerprints were found on the hammer, and we believe it was a murder weapon. Can you explain how your prints are clearly in a position that someone would use if they were murdering the Smiths with the hammer?
I used the hammer for fixing the fences recently.
If someone used the hammer after you, your fingerprints would have been smudged by the murderer's fingerprints, but yours were clear. Can you explain why?
Maybe the murderer wore gloves.
Do you think it was fair that Mr. Smith only paid you $4 for a whole month of work?
I was happy to get work, and I also got room and board.
Did you get along with the Smiths?
Sometimes Mr. Smith could be cruel and make fun of my English, but I forgave him.
Thank you. You may be excused. Please state your name for the record.
Dr. Wells.
Can you explain what qualifies you as a fingerprint expert?
I have worked in the field for more than 15 years. I have spent time reading and researching information on fingerprints, as I find it a fascinating area of study. I have analyzed and testified in more than 40 cases over my career.
What can you tell me about the fingerprints that were found on the hammer?
They belong to Anton Geisler.
Where on the hammer were the fingerprints found?
Low down on the handle where someone might be holding the hammer if they were swinging it at an object.
Were there any other fingerprints found on the hammer?
Yes, but they're higher up on the handle.
Whose fingerprints were found higher on the handle?
Henry Baller's prints.
Which set of prints more likely were from holding the hammer as a weapon?
The fingerprints from Anton were in the correct position for an attack on Mrs. Smith. The other ones were higher up on the handle, as if somebody had picked it up to move it.
What can you tell me about the fingerprint that was found on the east room window?
It also belonged to Anton Geisler and was found on the outside of the window.
What does the position of the fingerprint tell you?
The suspect fingerprints being on the outside sash indicates that the suspect came in via the window. There would be no reason to have fingerprints on the outside of the window otherwise.
How likely is it that two people have the same fingerprint?
0.
How about twins? Would they have the same fingerprints?
No.
Are the fingerprints and where they were found indicative of guilt of anyone?
I believe that the evidence supports the conclusion that Anton Geisler is the murderer.
Thank you. You may be excused.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Jake Thompson, and I am with the District Attorney's Office, bringing this case against Anton Geisler. Through evidence and witness testimony, I will show you that, without doubt, Anton Geisler murdered Mr. and Mrs. Smith in their own home. After having tea with them and Henry Bauer, although Henry went straight home, Anton doubled back and went to the workshop where he picked up a hammer and an axe. Since he knew that the front door was locked, he went to the east room window and broke it with a hammer. That is where we found blood type A+, which is the same as Anton's. The Smiths kept their money in a chest in that room. We believe that Anton took out the money because he was upset that he was only paid $4 for a month of work, and that Mr. Smith made fun of his lack of English skills. We believe that the dog woke up and frightened Anton, so instead of going back through the window, he entered the front room. The Smiths were still there, as evidenced by the remaining teacups. The Smiths were shocked and possibly screamed or yelled, causing Anton to panic. First, he slashed Mr. Smith with an axe, as evidenced by the arterial blood spray on the wall. Then he attacked and killed Mrs. Smith with a hammer, as Mrs. Smith's blood was found on the hammer. Anton next ran to the parlor where he dropped the hammer. Then he ran outside the house and dropped the bloody axe by the east room window. Our fingerprint expert, Dr. Wells, will testify that the prints on the hammer belong to Anton Geisler. He will also testify that the fingerprints found on the outside sash of the east room window also belong to Anton Geisler. Our case connects Anton's motive, which is money, his means, which was the hammer and the axe, and the opportunity, which was that he knew the Smiths would be alone, and how to break into the house. I request that you return a guilty verdict for this heinous crime. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Kevin Taylor, and I'm the lawyer defending Anton Geisler. As the jury looks through the evidence presented, we can conclude that Anton is completely innocent. After having tea with the Smiths and Henry, Anton went straight home. And as Henry will testify, he did not see him double back. Where blood type A+ was found, it could have belonged to Henry or been there earlier, so the blood evidence proves nothing. Additionally, where the prosecution points out that the hair or fingerprints were found, this all can be explained by Anton's work as a handyman around the house. He regularly used all the tools in the workshop, including the axe and hammer. It would be very odd not to find his fingerprints on those. Anton was very thankful to the Smiths for giving him a job and shelter after he arrived. The Smiths even invited him for tea on his final day of work for them, which shows that they had a good relationship. Even the prosecution's argument about opportunity does not implicate Anton. He would have had many other better opportunities to steal the money in the chest, and he never did. The day of the murder was not a good opportunity because Henry was nearby, as was a local peddler. Therefore, I implore you to return a verdict of innocent, as my client is clearly not guilty.